Imagine you've just landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport. Soft music plays in your head, the kind you hear in luxury perfume commercials. You're expecting the fantasy, the France of Louis Vuitton storefronts, sunlit cafe terraces, intellectual conversations over espresso, and a work-life balance so gentle it makes American capitalism look like a correctional facility. You think you're stepping into a wealthy, mature superpower, a country that figured things out decades ago. But the moment you look past the postcard, the illusion begins to crack. You're not entering a rich country. You're entering a country that is quietly, politely, and methodically going broke. A country where the middle class is dissolving in real time, where ambition is punished rather than rewarded, where the most talented young people are fleeing with suitcases full of degrees, and where the government is sitting on a debt bomb so large it makes Italy look fiscally disciplined. The croissants are still excellent, the museums are still breathtaking, but beneath the surface, the economic foundations are rotting. This is the reality of French decline, and it starts with something that sounds abstract, but is deeply personal: wages. Let's play a simple game. Imagine you are a young French professional. You did everything society asked of you. You survived the brutal classes' preparatoires. You earned your master's degree. You speak English well enough to work internationally. You land what is supposed to be a solid job in a respectable mid-sized city like Lyon or Bordeaux. Then you open your first paycheck and feel a strange sinking sensation. $940. That is the median net monthly salary in France in 2024. Half the country earns less than that. Now compare yourself to a friend who didn't go to university, who maybe works as a cashier, cleaner, or unqualified server. They earn the SMIC, the French minimum wage, which, after benefits and adjustments, sits around $1,400 net per month. The distance between minimum survival and educated professional is barely $500. In the United States, the gap between minimum wage and median income is vast. In France, it is a rounding error. Economists have a word for this phenomenon: SMICization. It is the great flattening of the wage structure. Over the last 2 decades, France has compressed incomes into a narrow band where effort, skill, and responsibility barely translate into higher living standards. Labor costs are so high for employers that meaningful raises are almost impossible. When inflation rises, the government aggressively increases the minimum wage, but salaries above it remain frozen. The floor rises, the ceiling does not. Decades ago, only a small fraction of workers earned minimum wage. Today, over 17% of the workforce is officially on it, and millions more hover just above it, trapped in a gray zone where advancement feels pointless. The psychological effect of this cannot be overstated. Imagine studying for 5 years, managing teams, carrying responsibility, only to take home barely more than someone stacking shelves. Why work harder? Why innovate? Why take risks? This isn't just an economic issue, it's a motivation killer. So it turns an entire society into a participation trophy economy, where the reward for playing by the rules is barely being able to afford rent. And rent is where the illusion collapses completely. If you think $900 goes far because healthcare is free, welcome to the French real estate market. In Paris, a decent studio apartment, not a palace, not luxury, just a functional box where you can touch the fridge from your bed, costs between $200 and $1,500 a month. Do the math. On a median salary, living in the capital isn't difficult. It is mathematically impossible without roommates, family help, or inherited wealth. You're not living in Paris. You're camping in it. This wage stagnation might be survivable if the broader economy were dynamic, productive, and future-oriented. But it isn't. Drive 2 hours north of the luxury boutiques of Paris, and you enter another France entirely. The France périphérique, the forgotten industrial heartland where the ghost of French manufacturing lingers. We still imagine France as an industrial powerhouse: Airbus, nuclear reactors, high-speed trains, and those symbols exist, but they are remnants of a past era, not indicators of a vibrant present. Manufacturing today accounts for barely 10% of French GDP. Germany's share is nearly double. Italy's is higher. Even Poland is catching up. France de-industrialized faster and more aggressively than almost any Western nation. For 40 years, policymakers in Paris became obsessed with the idea of a post-industrial society. Factories were considered dirty, outdated, politically inconvenient. The future, they believed, was services, consulting, luxury branding, and tourism. France would become the cultural museum of the world. And in one sense, the bet worked. France is the most visited country on earth. Tourists flood Paris, Provence, and the Riviera. But you cannot build a superpower on waiters, tour guides, and souvenir shops. When factories disappear, so do high-paying blue-collar jobs that sustain middle-class life in smaller towns. When those jobs move to Eastern Europe or Asia, towns hollow out. Bakeries close. Schools shrink. Doctors retire and are not replaced. This is the soil in which political rage grows. When you see yellow vest protests, burning toll booths, and road blockades, you are not watching random violence. You are watching people from peripheral regions who were sacrificed to the museum economy while Paris sold $3,000 handbags to foreign tourists. The consequences became painfully clear during COVID, when France discovered it no longer had the capacity to manufacture basic paracetamol. The country of Pasteur had to rely on India and China for painkillers. That moment was not an accident. It was the logical outcome of decades of industrial neglect. And hovering over all of this is the debt. France does not have its own printing press. It uses the euro. In 2024, French public debt reached 113% of GDP, nearly double the EU's official limit of 60%. France has not seen a balanced government budget since 1974. For half a century, every government, left, right, or centrist, has spent more than it earned. This is not about ideology. It is about addiction. Much of that money does not go to infrastructure or defense. It goes to social protection. France spends roughly a third of its entire GDP on welfare, the highest level in the world. It is a Rolls-Royce welfare state funded by a Peugeot economy, and now the bill is coming due. Interest payments on French debt are becoming one of the largest items in the national budget, on track to surpass education spending. France is approaching a point where it will spend more paying for past mistakes than investing in its future. If that does not redefine what poorer than you think means, nothing will. The illusion of wealth in France does not collapse all at once. It erodes slowly through systems that once worked beautifully and now function only because people pretend not to notice the cracks. One of the most misunderstood of these systems is taxation, the great salary illusion that convinces workers they are earning far more than they ever actually see. France is a world champion of taxes, rivaling even the most aggressive welfare states on earth. Return to that young professional from earlier and imagine the full financial autopsy behind their paycheck. If a company is willing to spend $60,000 per year to employ you in a decent mid-level role, that number already includes an enormous hidden cost: employer social contributions. Before you even appear on the balance sheet as a worker, the state takes a massive cut. What remains becomes your gross salary, roughly $43,000, but that is not your income either. From there, employee contributions for pensions, healthcare, unemployment, and social insurance carve away another large portion, leaving something closer to $33,000. And still, the process is not finished. Income tax then takes its share. By the time the money actually reaches your bank account, nearly half of what your employer paid for your labor has disappeared into state coffers. France collects between 45 and 48% of its entire GDP in taxes and social charges every year, the highest burden in the OECD. This creates a slow-motion economic chokehold. Companies cannot afford to raise net salaries because the marginal cost of doing so is astronomical. Workers, stripped of disposable income, cannot save, invest, or consume at levels that would fuel growth. The economy stagnates, and the state, seeing lower growth, responds by raising taxes again to maintain spending commitments. It is a self-reinforcing loop that slowly suffocates both productivity and ambition. And ambition is already treated with suspicion. For years, France imposed a wealth tax that penalized citizens simply for owning assets, regardless of income. While the most punitive version has been modified, the cultural message remains intact. Success must be justified, explained, and partially surrendered. This mentality bleeds directly into the most explosive issue in modern French politics: retirement. When the government proposed raising the retirement age from 62 to 64, the country erupted into protests, strikes, and riots. To much of the outside world, this reaction appeared irrational. Many developed nations already expect citizens to work until 67 or beyond. But in France, the pension system is not merely a benefit. It is a social contract built on a demographic reality that no longer exists. The system operates on a pay-as-you-go basis, meaning today's workers are not saving for their own retirement, but directly financing the pensions of current retirees. This model functions smoothly only when there are many workers supporting each retiree. In the 1960s, France had roughly 4 workers per pensioner. Today, that ratio has collapsed to around 1.7 and continues to decline. People are living longer, birth rates are insufficient to replace the workforce, and the math has turned brutal. The system bleeds billions of euros every year. The government faces only 2 real options: cut pensions, which is political suicide, or force people to work longer, which is also political suicide, but slightly slower. As a result, the country remains trapped in denial. Young workers understand intuitively that they are unlikely to receive full pensions themselves, yet they are taxed heavily to sustain a system that primarily benefits an older generation. This intergenerational imbalance is not just unfair. It actively impoverishes the working population while locking public finances into permanent deficit. And as opportunity narrows at home, France's most valuable export accelerates: its people. Walk into a tech firm in London, a bank in New York, a research lab in Zurich, or a startup in Montreal, and you will see an outsized number of French names. France produces exceptional engineers, mathematicians, scientists, and financiers. Its elite education system is remarkably effective at identifying and training talent. What it fails to do is retain it. For a highly skilled professional, the choice becomes stark: stay in Paris, earn a relatively modest salary, surrender nearly half of it to taxes, struggle to rent a small apartment, and wait years for advancement in a rigid hierarchy, or leave. In the United States, Switzerland, or parts of Asia, the same individual can earn multiples of their French salary, pay lower effective taxes, and access leadership roles almost immediately. Unsurprisingly, millions choose to go. Estimates suggest between 2.5 and 3 million French citizens live abroad, and this is not a random cross-section of society. These are disproportionately the risk-takers, the innovators, the builders. France pays for their education, and foreign economies harvest the returns. This brain drain has profound consequences. It helps explain why France has produced relatively few global technology champions in the last 2 decades. Many of the most successful founders and executives with French backgrounds built their companies elsewhere, where the environment rewarded speed, failure, and ambition rather than punishing them. As talent exits and systems strain, the public services that once justified France's high taxes begin to fray. The unspoken deal for decades was simple: surrender a large share of your income, and in return receive world-class healthcare, education, infrastructure, and security. Today, that deal is breaking. Emergency rooms routinely involve waits of 12, 15, even 20 hours. Rural areas have become medical deserts, with entire regions lacking general practitioners. The education system, once a source of national pride, struggles with underpaid teachers, recruitment crises, and declining outcomes. Courts are slow, underfunded, and overwhelmed. The tragedy is not merely that services are declining, but that citizens are still paying premium prices for them. When the public sector fails, those with means quietly opt out. They send their children to private schools, seek private health care, and insulate themselves from deterioration. Everyone else is left navigating systems that function increasingly like rationed goods. This quiet stratification undermines the very idea of égalité that defines the French Republic. Over all of this hangs a heavy psychological fog. France consistently ranks among the most pessimistic countries in the world regarding expectations for the future, often scoring lower than nations facing war or extreme poverty. This pessimism is not irrational. It is rooted in the widening gap between what France believes it is and what it experiences daily. Citizens are raised on stories of grandeur: Napoleon, the Enlightenment, de Gaulle, universal values, and then confront a reality of shrinking influence, declining competitiveness, and cultural dilution in a globalized world increasingly dominated by English, American platforms, and foreign capital. The result is a form of collective dissonance, like an aging aristocrat living in a grand but unheated castle, surrounded by symbols of past glory while feeling the cold seep in. This mindset becomes an economic force in its own right. Consumers save instead of spending. Entrepreneurs hesitate to start businesses because failure carries lasting stigma. Risk-taking declines. Radical politics gain appeal as traditional parties collapse under the weight of broken promises. France, in this sense, is not an isolated case, but a warning. It is a preview of what happens when a wealthy Western democracy tries to maintain a 20th century standard of living with 21st century demographics and a shrinking productive base. Aging populations, de-industrialization, debt addiction, political polarization, these are not uniquely French problems. France simply encountered them earlier and more intensely. If financial markets ever lose patience with French debt, if the European Union is forced to confront the fragility of its second largest economy, the consequences will not stop at France's borders. The country's struggle is not a spectacle to mock. It is a flare fired into the night, signaling what may await others who mistake stability for permanence. France has survived immense crises before, and resilience remains part of its national character. There are pockets of renewal, growing entrepreneurial ecosystems, and younger generations pushing against outdated dogmas. But the arithmetic is unforgiving. Debt, demographics, and stagnant productivity cannot be wished away. France today is not poor in the obvious sense. It is poor in momentum, poor in opportunity, and increasingly poor in belief. The correction will come not because the country lacks culture, intelligence, or history, but because no nation, however beautiful, can indefinitely spend more than it produces and promise more than it can deliver.